Putin, as you said, you were engaged with Russia at that time, hoping that there would be some sort of rapprochement.
Sure, and I'm criticized to this day for having made the attempt. I saw Putin in the Kremlin. We had local border traffic between this exclave of Kaliningrad, 1 million Russians there, and the neighboring Polish regions. One of the most interesting aspects, we had thousands of Russian local councillors and mayors of small towns coming to see booming Polish provincial towns and seeing, wow, self-government works. We had the visit of the Patriarch of Russia, signing an agreement on reconciliation with our church, consciously modeled on the reconciliation between the Polish and German churches. We had groups of historians establishing the facts of history, publishing a huge tome of establishing the facts. And
there's a reconciliation of some very basic historical...
On the basis of truth, which is the only way you can do it.
He visited Katyn?
And not only that, Vladimir Putin was the first leader of Russia to come to Gdańsk on the anniversary of the Second World War, which meant that he was joining the European narrative of where and why the Second World War started, instead of having the Stalinist version. And he was so close to condemning the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact.
That's a big thing.
And then he visited Katyn, the place of the massacre of our officer corps by the Soviets in 1940. And then partly, I think, as a result of Arab Spring, he didn't like the sight of Mubarak in an iron cage and Gaddafi crawling out of that drain pipe. And then there were protests in Moscow against his return to the Kremlin. He decided that this was too dangerous and that Russia would become a rival pole of integration, that Russia no longer wanted to join the West. It was his decision. We gave him every encouragement to be on a convergence course with us.
And you wrote later, not too long ago, in a New York Times essay that Putin's long-term goals have not changed. And they are, to quote you, to rebuild the Russian Empire, undermine transatlantic security guarantees, divide the West, and weaken the United States. Is that...
Well, my old colleague and sparring partner, Sergei Lavrov, put it rather amusingly when he was asked to whose advice does President Putin listen these days? And Lavrov said he has 3 advisors: Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, and Catherine the Great.
And Mr. Lavrov survived?
In regimes like that, you can't just resign when you disagree with the policy. You serve at the pleasure.
You have to continue to work. So, before we broaden this, since we are so close to the Ukraine crisis, where does the whole thing stand? The war has now gone on longer than the war between Soviet Union and the Nazis. And so is there any sign, because we hear of a 28-point plan which became a 20-point plan, is there a hope of a ceasefire? Do you see any movement towards that, or is it going to just drag on?
Well, I think originally Vladimir Putin wanted his special operation to be more like Caracas than Kiev.
So 3 days.
And Bogota, and it didn't work. And we now estimate that the war has cost Russia in military expenses and in additional costs at least $1 trillion. $1 trillion.
And a lot of men.
We think last year alone it was 300,000 dead and wounded. There are days on which Russia loses more than 1,000 men per day. And Ukrainian losses are much smaller. Of course, Ukraine has fewer resources, but I think Putin made several mistakes. The way he has treated people on occupied territories is the way with unbelievable cruelties, stealing children, arresting at the slightest sign of resistance, Russifying the culture, telling the Ukrainians that if you give up, you will be wiped out culturally. And so the Ukrainians understood that this is for war, for them, an existential war. And of course, right now, there are large parts of many Ukrainian cities which, in a temperature of minus 20 degrees, have no electricity and no heating. Imagine living in one of those apartment blocks, minus 20, no electricity.
Because they're attacking the infrastructure.
Because they are deliberately targeting area, heating and electricity plant.
So you don't see a ceasefire on the horizon?
I think Vladimir Putin still wants to achieve his ultimate aim, which is to control all of Ukraine. And when he continues to say, it's Zelensky that's the problem, what he means is that he wants to create a political crisis in Ukraine, which would allow him to place someone in charge that would follow his wishes. It's not just about territory, it's about the geopolitical orientation of Ukraine.
But Mr. Minister, if Putin thought this was a 3-day special operation, Mr. Trump thought that with one phone call he's going to end the war. So even that hasn't happened. And there is a sort of big fiction that Steve Witkoff is, doing something, and Kushner and Witkoff go and talk to Putin, and something is in the pipeline. And
well, you've been in the business of diplomacy, and I'm in the business of diplomacy. We don't negotiate only with friends.
Of course.
You negotiate with rivals and sometimes with enemies. So I don't blame anybody for talking to the enemy. It's the quality of the deal that you produce that matters.
And there's also a kind of escalation happening in terms of a hybrid war. Poland had drones coming over. You had other events. A lot of drones were seen over Germany, Denmark, and all that. So is that part of this war? Is it?
Absolutely. And remember, hybrid war isn't just some nuisance on the internet, although we have plenty of that. We have a cognitive assault on the minds of our internet users, particularly on our young people. Mm-hmm. The Russians are spending billions, also in the so-called global south, trying to affect, promote their narratives. But it's much more serious than that. So we've had attacks all over Europe, including in Poland, on our hospitals. When a hospital's emergency line is blocked remotely, people can die. Mr. Putin has sent us death squads.